This court case does not take away the GPO prohibition. It is still the law. Now, if you've really got your system dialed in, you got all your software humming, is that initial WAC purchase really awful? Welcome, everybody, to the IGQ podcast, where we look into pharmacy supply chain and the pharmaceutical industry that feeds it. I am your host, Jason Mills. Today, we are going to be talking about the 340B GPO Prohibition, specifically a recent court case that came out at the very end of March. So we've had about a month to digest it, have conversations about it. And of course, with all of those comments, I've got questions. So to help me with dealing with some of the fallout, maybe some of the nuances, some of the interpretation of this court ruling, I'm going to bring my buddy Kyle over. Now, Kyle, normally I would do this like really big, long introduction of all the accolades and everything else, but I've known you for a good long while now, and I am just going to put you in the frame of the guy. For anybody that doesn't know Kyle, I got to meet Kyle at the Medical University of South Carolina, where we both worked, but we first didn't really bump into each other until it really was a 340B component. You were on the retail side of the house. I was a little bit more on the acute side at the hospital. And it was really once we started getting into a lot of inventory and 340B-ness and messing with TPAs and different settings like that, that you and I got to know each other. And that's when I realized I am not the smartest guy in the 340B space, especially when it came to inventory management, massaging orders, and getting things to go through in a compliant, responsible way. When I say Kyle's the guy, that's what I'm talking about. So welcome and thanks for coming on today.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you having me on. Wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Well, I got to call balls and strikes, man. There is a lot of operational challenges when you are getting into the 340B space. And sometimes when you are going from the conceptual, here's the letter of the law, here's kind of how we understand the system or the program to work. Then when we get a guy with your skill set, super smart, super into the data, and then you look at the operationalization of the 340B program, sometimes those two don't mix. Sometimes they can be challenged by each other. Before we really kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the case, which is really what I wanted to talk about today, and the fallout from that case, just a quick word to anybody else that might be watching. This is going to be a very 340B heavy discussion. If you are not familiar with the 340B program, or this is your first introduction to the 340B program, stop. This is not a good primer for a intro to 340B. I guess we should just highlight that there is this thing called the GPO Prohibition. The GPO Prohibition in the 340B program is one of the few actual prohibitions that's spelled out in the actual letter of the law. And that's where this got kind of hazy in this particular court case. So the GPO prohibition, very simply stated, if you are a covered entity, in other words, if you're a hospital that participates in the 340B program, disproportionate share hospitals, kind of the OG in the 340B space, you are allowed to purchase from what we refer to as a GPO purchase. So if you are participating in the 340B space, can't make a drug purchase at a GPO rate and administer it or provide it to an outpatient. That is against the rules. If it's going into the outpatient space, that's what, in the mind of HRSA and the people that wrote the law, that's what the 340B price is for. So if it's going outpatient, it should just go through a PHS order. If it's going inpatient, it should go through a GPO purchase. You've also got WAC in there, but interestingly enough, we will get to WAC spend as a result of this conversation, because that was really the crux of this court case. Clean that up for me. How did I do? Is that a terrible explanation of inpatient, outpatient?
That was a great explanation, Jason. That's my understanding also. You can't make any of your GPO purchases get administered for an outpatient, and that necessitates that first purchase at WAC so that we can establish these neutral inventories in these mixed use areas, which again, is the thing we'll get into in a minute, but that's probably the original origin of a WAC account, right? Is that we need these to be able to establish a neutral inventory.
And WAC being the definitive kind of neutral account type. Right. So as we get into this, we'll just focus on dish hospitals in general within the 340B space. You always have this triplet of accounts. You get a 340B account, you get a GPO account, and you get a WAC account. And the replenishment model is really what was the big focus of this court case that came out. So what are we referencing? So at the end of March, a lawsuit was brought against HRSA, and the challenge to HRSA was specifically what you were just talking about. If you are doing the replenishment model and you've never purchased a particular NDC before, so really going to focus on that initial purchase. HRSA's original guidance coming out of 2013 was if you are going to make this first purchase in a replenishment model, you don't know what type of patient that drug's going to end up going to. So the safest bet would be to purchase it on that neutral account, that WAC account, and that essentially kind of starts you off. Now we've got a record of it. It's hit our inventory. Providers are writing orders for it, and we've sent it out the door. And it might have gone to an outpatient. It might have gone to an inpatient. And because we're on this replenishment model, and now that gives you the credit to replenish that drug at either one of those, depending on what type of patient it went to. Is that essentially what you're understanding?
That's it. And that's what allows you to have your next bottle vial that's on your shelf can go to either patient because you've earned that and you've set up that initial neutral purchase.
Exactly. Now, it is worth noting that when I first heard of this, 2013, 2014, kind of predates good WAC as a price point. It was always typically the highest cost amongst the three different price points. And so, okay, we want to avoid that, but it's almost this necessary thing that we have to satisfy in order to get it into the shelves. Okay.
I guess the other option that probably not many want to do is to have segregated inventory and have this is dedicated outpatient space.
Yes.
That's another logistical nightmare of having two shelves in a pharmacy. This is held for inpatients. This is held for outpatients.
Yes.
So that the neutral model really streamlines that from an operational standpoint. But then it, of course, does create WAC.
Thank you for reframing that. So I guess it is worth mentioning that the replenishment model isn't the only way to manage your 340B purchasing and your 340B inventory. You can, to your point, have a physical inventory model. Talk about a logistics nightmare, right? You trust me, you're going to get in trouble. So the easiest model to adopt, to your point, the cleanest model is one that's very software driven. That's why a lot of third-party administrators, 340B splitter software really got into this space. And almost all of them, to a degree, reference this type of replenishment model, right? Let's talk a little bit about what this case was really trying to present. Now, without getting into the specifics of who the plaintiffs were, from hospitals to GPOs, the argument that was put forward wasn't necessarily that hospitals have to buy on GPO or PHS. It was really just challenging that HRSA had established a policy that in a replenishment model, WAC was the immediate account, this neutral account that you had to make these purchases under. And the judgment that came out of this case, in fact, stated, well, you guys are correct. It's really up to the hospital to determine which account they want to make this initial purchase on. But what the hospitals and the GPOs were stating was this guidance that HRSA had implemented was costing hospitals over time and over the aggregate millions of excess dollars, because again, WAC typically is the most expensive account or price point for an NDC. So on first blush, like what's your reaction to just hearing how that came out? Did that tickle your brain?
Yeah, it's got all kind of spidey senses going off of what does this mean for hospitals? What can we do with a product? Historically, first purchaser always is at WAC.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do if we know that we are going to start buying a new drug that's going to be primarily outpatient? Could we go straight to 340B? If it's the opposite, if it's a drug that's going to be almost entirely inpatient, could we go straight to GPO and avoid those initial WAC expenses? But how do we keep that straight in that we still can't take that GPO bottle that we bought and go administer it on an outpatient? When that scenario happens, do we kind of have a different replenishment that happens? Goodness, billing for waste, we didn't bill entirely for all the product that we bought.
Right.
We then maybe accumulate on WAC over time Do we start with GPO and then we accumulate on either 340B or WAC over time?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Like, is that kind of a model that could end up happening? It really changes a lot. I'm curious what the split sequence would start to look like, because we all kind of have it
Yeah.
set up that WAC up charged to one
So-
side or the other and go from there.
That's where my mind went first. My brain first started going on down the TPA route, down the 340B splitter software route. And the only way I could kind of have this make sense in my brain was if I truly, truly wanted to not purchase my first purchase on WAC. It was almost like you'd have to have a -1 buffer, like a quantity of -1 in your accumulations on both your 340B side and your GPO side. So it was almost like giving you permission, right? You can purchase it at your leisure at either a GPO or a PHS, route. Like that was kind of how I was thinking about it. It's like, okay, it's not going to affect your accumulations in a negative way going forward after that first one. So how do you do that? How do you account for that first purchase if it's not in fact going to a neutral account? I thought what you just cited with the kind of a WAC measure is also an interesting approach. But once customers of ours started hearing about this court case and started sending questions to us, especially when the headline that gets splashed across all of our, pharmacy-centric news wires says HRSA policy vacated, right? Like you don't have to buy, on WAC anymore. Holy cow. Like people just lost their minds. This court case, I guess that's what we really should have opened on, was this court case does not take away the GPO prohibition. It is still in statute. It is still the law. You cannot purchase at a GPO rate and administer to an outpatient setting if you are a dish hospital. Okay. This was very specific to those initial purchases. Now, here's my thing. If you've really got your system dialed in, you got all your software humming, is that initial WAC purchase really awful?
If everything is humming, probably not. It's
Right?
an upfront expense, but we've seen so many times of these things that just don't accumulate well. They have a lot of waste. They're administered in areas that, maybe don't charge 100% or scan 100% to capture the right NDC,
Sure.
and they just don't go that what we'd love to see is you get an initial WAC buy and then everything going forward is either GPO or 340B or some mix of the two. But realistically, there are a lot of products who consistently are the majority WAC. Think insulins. There's so much waste that, is insulin an area where for our inpatient hospitals, I would wager that the bulk of those administrations are GPO. Could that be a thing that's now bought initially on GPO and maybe continue to be GPO, even though we're not charging 100% for a vial? We're wasting a lot.
That's a good point. And there's other waste rules as well, right? Like you're not allowed to waste more than the smaller container that's available on the market. We see that in the infusion space sometimes when something that's traditionally administered in the outpatient setting, let's take just throw out a drug, a rituximab. And if it comes in a 500 milligram and 100 milligram vial, if you use a 500 milligram, but you try to waste essentially the equivalent of a 100 milligram vial, it's not going to fly. They're going to be like, no, if the dose was 400, you should have used 400s instead of wasting 100 and used 400 from a 5. I get all that. So it kind of begs the question, well, if WAC isn't the penalty that it used to be, is there another issue then that's going on? And that's where my brain started to itch, because one of the, I guess, mouthpieces for this case was a GPO. And now you start to understand, I see, maybe there is some other interests involved in not always going to this WAC side of the house. So to catch everybody up, or at least, follow my third grade Crayola brain thinking, is GPOs want that volume. They want that spend on the GPO side, because if that new NDC is something that they have contracted with and want their members purchasing, well, famously, WAC volume doesn't count. The GPO doesn't get credit for that volume. The hospital doesn't get credit for that volume through the lens of their GPO program. So I get it. they don't want you to buy WAC because they want their account or their contracts accessed more often and not have these hospitals have to rely on that neutral purchase. But again, I'm very hospital centric. I know you're hospital centric when it comes to that. So once I first heard this court case, very much like you, I was like, oh, whoa, what's this going to mean? And then it just took a couple of minutes to kind of read the language and understand a little bit more about where this target was. But it also seems very self-serving from a GPO's perspective, right? So under the guise of this is for the hospitals, it's also for the GPOs, right?
Sure. Yeah, that's a lot more would go that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are some pros to potentially getting to buy more on GPO up front. For a lot of the GPO contracted items, I say overall, those are the things with the highest penalty to buy on WAC up front. So there's a bit of like, hey, this is good for hospital and GPO, that, hey, you could maybe buy the new GPO contracted NDC, you could switch to it without that 2 to 4 week period where you're paying 5x on WAC. So that helps both parties. Hospitals are on average now spending a lot of money on WAC. WAC is not the naughty bucket that it used to be.
Also, remember that WAC is not always bad. In fact, you and I, we work in helping to identify good WAC and potentially even making customers aware that here's an opportunity to buy at a sub-WAC price point, assuming things like there's not a GPO compliance or a wholesaler compliance type of model in play. It did get me thinking, wouldn't it be maybe a little easier on the front end if a GPO works with the manufacturer and says, hey, we want to contract with you and offer this contracted price to our members. Here's the kind of volume we're talking about. You guys can count on us as a GPO to try to get some volume up for you guys through our membership. Okay, fine. It'd be interesting to hear from industry on this, but I don't think it would be too challenging then for that manufacturer to be like, maybe we offer, since this is a new contract and people are going to be switching over to our product from one compliant to another, maybe we do a 6-month WAC is equal to GPO or something to that effect and just push that forward to membership. That way it just nullifies the overage that is spent from the hospital's perspective, keeps that flat, still allows you to do that neutral inventory model. And then you're cooking. And then maybe to your point, it's just a 2 to 3 week or obviously it depends on the drug. Some move faster than others, but a little bit of runway shown as like a GPO WAC contract. Does that sound crazy? Am I crazy?
No, I think that would be entirely fair. I don't know if they'd want to be like make it exactly the same, but a little bit, just make it close. Make the WAC price very close to the GPO cost for a little bit. So the hospitals, hey, once we build up our accruals, we'll start immediately in on this product. But I've always thought that it's not extremely fair to a hospital when the GPO changes their contracted NDC for a class. So, hey, I'm paying $3 a vial for a thing. We got a new GPO contract for $2.75. Sounds like a great savings, but it's got a $10 WAC price, and it's going to be a year to a year and a half before we even break even on that upfront WAC expense. Wouldn't it be extremely fair to say, hey, new NDC, it's $3 on WAC. You start buying that thing, you get your accruals, and we didn't increase your hospital spend.
100%. And we know that manufacturers are primarily the ones that execute those sub-WAC contracts anyway, either independently with a hospital or working through a Pexis or some other means. The manufacturers are involved. I feel like it wouldn't be that long of a conversation to be like, hey, for the benefit of our members, since this is going to be a manufacturer switch for this particular pharmacy class, let's also help them out. And let's just bring that WAC cost down for an introductory period. And if you don't hit that mark or you don't make your first purchase within 6 months, then you're probably either a smaller hospital or it's just not a fast mover. At which point, maybe you would make the timeline contingent based on volume and how often you order that product or how much you order of that product, etc. But I guess my point is people that are a lot smarter than me, a lot more comfortable with data could probably go in there and make a change like that. However, that doesn't benefit the GPO, right? Unless, and then here's how the whole thing comes around, if the site and the GPO got credit for those first WAC purchases as well. The danger that I think a decision like this can do is it can get misconstrued. Have you gotten any feedback? What kind of feedback have you gotten?
Absolutely. The first question we got is WAC accounts are going away. We could just buy everything in GPO and then 340B. And even on our retail spaces, we're not going to need WAC accounts. We're going to have GPO and 340B. And what kind of new contracts are GPOs going to have for retail drugs? It went down a rabbit hole in a strange way, and we're like, pump the brakes. We're not really what's going to happen here. As much as we'd love everybody to go to 0% WAC premium, it's probably not happening.
Right. I got a lot of the same feedback. I'm just not convinced that this is overly helpful. I guess I appreciate it from the perspective that, thank you, it's been made clear to me that I don't need to make my first purchase on WAC. But I don't know. Have you heard of any auditors that required that or made sure that happened?
I hadn't heard that. I think it's more shoring up your utilization with your purchases and making sure that your 340B volume administered is very similar to your 340B volume purchase. Not so much going back to prove to me that you had 3 WAC invoices to start this whole thing off, which could be ages ago with some of these drugs.
Sure. I mean, the only thing that we haven't really talked about yet, though, is there is something to be said for that initial purchase, especially if it was going into the outpatient setting, and especially if it's a very expensive drug. Even at a 340B ceiling price is a very expensive drug. Let's call it $20,000. If you are making that first purchase on WAC and you have to submit for reimbursement, and that reimbursement model is based on your acquisition cost, well, I could understand a little bit of hesitancy there, because if it's not based on acquisition cost, it's based on some fixed rate, there is a real danger that if you had purchased it at a PHS rate, you would make margin as a hospital. You would make a little bit of a profit, right? Enough to justify all of the little points that drug had to hit all the way between procurement to being administered. I get it. And then the flip side is you might actually lose money if it went on the WAC side. Again, if it's not based on acquisition. But even if it is based on acquisition, and I'm really interested because you've got way more experience in working with insurance companies from your background, the state is a major payer for a lot of these hospitals. And if you have a scenario where it's carve in, so you potentially could have a Medicaid patient come into your pharmacy, get it filled, and you submit that acquisition cost. Well, if they're carve in, that means that you're allowed to do it at a 3B rate. But if it's this initial purchase, that first acquisition cost is going to be on WAC. If you are a resident of that state, you just helped pay for that very, very expensive. And if the WAC price is $100,000, which is not out of the realm of possibilities, I could see the state making a case that this hurts the state. I don't know. Am I wrong?
Usually based on the qualification of that prescription and less on how it was purchased. I'm not aware of any covered entities who have set up that hey, I know that this initial purchase was at WAC, so I'm going to bill Medicaid for the WAC cost. I think everybody that I'm aware of is set up that, hey, if this is a 340B eligible prescription, we bill for the 340B acquisition cost.
Regardless of how you purchased it.
That's how you purchase. So there's absolutely can be scenarios, low volume, high cost drugs where you need it for a patient once or twice, or you're only filling for Medicaid patients for this drug and there's no private payers in the mix at all, where, hey, let's throw out that it's $5,000 on WAC and it's got penny 340B pricing, right? So yeah, that first one, you're buying it at $5,000 and you're probably getting paid with basically a dispensing fee. Maybe you get $15, $20 dispensing fee and you are far in the hole and you're not coming out of that hole until you get maybe a private payer or something else. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't see that scenario happening a ton.
Okay.
I think there's probably enough payer mix with most products and most pharmacies for that to be offset over time.
It's kind of like subsidized by other payers paying different rates, and kind of blunts the pain of those. It's got to be billed or submitted as a 340B qualifying thing, even though you didn't pay a 340B price to bring it in. But because of your contracts and agreements with other payers, doesn't hurt so much or washes out in the end.
Mix one ineligible patient in there and then it's all evened out over time. It would really just be very low volume, short duration of need, or a medication that's 100% Medicaid, and I don't know if those exist really.
Right. I mean, and it's interesting as we kind of go through that little exercise, we're talking almost exclusively now about the outpatient space, which the GPOs don't have a foot in, or at least in a dish hospital perspective. So they don't really have a dog in that fight, but the hospitals absolutely do. And especially once you walk into the realm of specialty pharmacy, where the spread potentially, you cited a penny price earlier, that is still a thing, by the way. Penny prices are still out there, but there could be a massive spread between those two. So in those circumstances, I do know that a lot of times hospitals will just push for that first purchase because they, especially in the specialty world where you see the patient coming a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Maybe even days, maybe even weeks before they actually get the prescription ordered or filled, you kind of know if they're going to be eligible or not. And if the drug is of a high enough cost, I know that there are hospitals and pharmacies out there that are like, we're just going to buy this. We know it's going to be 340B, but there's no way we're going to pay that 10, 15x, or in the case of penny price, it could be 1,000,000% more expensive on the WAC side. So going back to what we were talking about at the very, very beginning, it was never presented to me as a law. It was just, this is how bookkeeping is made the easiest. We're now here, though. The GPO prohibition is still there, but the policy has been vacated. So now hospitals have been given this kind of rein. They can make that judgment if they want to. I would be interested to see if any GPOs measure this. That's a lot of data to go through, and that sounds pretty gnarly from a statistics point of view. That's why I'm not going to do it. But somebody should at least try to measure if this has actually made any kind of a spend impact or not. I guess we'll see moving forward if anybody does that. Well, I guess before we close here, kind of a little bit of thought experiment time. Do we think that there should be an expansion of this idea? Should WAC be challenged at all? Should hospitals try to remove the GPO prohibition? Do you think there's any validity there?
Part of the idea sounds fascinating and like all the possibilities they could unlock.
Sure.
But is that offset somewhat by the strategy and helpfulness of WAC now that it's not so terrible? I have to look around a little bit and do some analytics on this. I bet that there are some customers who have sub-WAC savings exceeding their WAC premium dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
I could see that.
The initial thought of like WAC accounts are going away, I don't know if I would like to see them go away, but maybe there's a way to use them a little bit more strategically if we don't have to make all these purchases. If GPO prohibition could go away, that may open up a lot of GPO negotiation space, particularly in the infusion and retail areas, just because there's probably very little GPO spend out there anywhere, especially with these covered entities. That why go after contracts in there that could help hospitals? Is there a lot of other space that they could do if GPO prohibition went away in those areas?
So we're not going to open up a GPO account for our retail stores that are 340B eligible. We know we can't do that. That's fine. But boy, it'd be nice if there was just a little bit of a compromise on the WAC side. So as interesting as this case was, it really does feel like a nothing burger for me, at least on initial blush. I've had a month to chew on it. I don't really see a there. If you're out there, keep those WAC accounts rolling. It does make the accounting easier. But if we're going to continue to have these conversations, like I said earlier, I think if there is going to be a transition, if there's going to be a new NDC, have the manufacturers and the GPOs work out something in the short term so that they can kind of blunt that overage and give credit to the GPOs for those initial WAC purchases, again, within a ramp up period, right? I just feel like that would be a much easier adoption, and it would benefit hospitals, it would benefit the GPOs, and not for nothing, the manufacturers might also benefit from it too by not having to receive these reclass requests. So maybe this would be a win-win-win if we could set something up like that. But what didn't we cover, man?
I think what's rolling around in my noodle here is so things that create a lot of WAC premium that we typically see. So we see things that are hard to accumulate, your insulins, your OR drugs, your things that go into areas that don't scan well. Those are more the persistent. And then the spikes that we see most often are shortage purchases. A thing is short and it's got a great GPO price and a terrible WAC price, and I need it. I'm going to buy a whole bunch of it, and I'm going to buy it all at that at that high WAC price because that's the only thing I have option. Is there a part of this that could apply to those shortage situations when I know that I'm buying a very inpatient heavy drug?
Yeah, that doesn't require, like I said, some of those reclass efforts downstream, like something that's more upfront, something that could be contained. What are you thinking? Are you thinking something like a discounted rate, or
like, could you, if there was some grace in a shortage time, you can go, let's say 30 days worth of normal utilization negative on your, say, your GPO account.
Mm-hmm.
And after that time, you get that, bring that drug in, you administer it over the next 30 days. In theory, should be back to whole. And maybe at that point, if not, then you could have to reclass it or evaluate it. It might be a nightmare to track. Just thinking, is there a part of this that we could use for those situations? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you and I, we see it all the time. We're looking at KPIs, we're looking at WAC premium and WAC premium percents, and we're like, oh, spike, we'll hover over it. That was the time where this was short. All right, that shortage costs $100,000 in WAC premium. Right? We don't typically see a lot of hospitals going back and reclassing a lot of those once they utilize them, but is there a way to avoid the upfront WAC costs?
So just to kind of keep going, to pull on that thread just a little bit when it comes to back orders, ever since WAC and this whole replenishment model was introduced, a lot of sites now, just when they go to place a back order, they just place it on that WAC account. Mm-hmm. Because it's going to be a high volume order, right? More than they've got any historical accumulations for it, typically. And it's the safest bet because it's, you're not going to go into some kind of an accumulation hole or negative accumulation picture. It's going to go down that way. So I hear you 100%. The challenges that and that I know are going to be, well, what defines a drug as drug shortage, right? Is it on the FDA list? Is it on the ASHP's drug shortages database? How do we define shortage? Which is probably a conversation for a completely different podcast. But it is noteworthy that has become the norm. And not only that, people have been trained on it and have moved to other organizations so much that it is now just the standard when it comes to back order management from a dish hospital perspective. And you're absolutely right. You see these crazy WAC spikes up and down, and some sites will chase those reclasses as it stabilizes and it comes forward. But again, that means that you as a hospital have already conceded that you need a resource who goes after those things. Yep. In many hospitals, you don't see that there is a dedicated resource to perform that type of activity. It typically falls to somebody within the supply chain ranks, whether it's buyers, analysts, 340B folks, somebody else within that department, they need a signal. Now, a lot of people can use, a program like QuicksortRx, and that can help them identify those big opportunities that they might need to reclass. And of course, for those types of customers, you've got people that are helping guide as to, this one is worth your time. This one, maybe not so much. All right. So clearly we've had a lot of thoughts on that. There might be more that comes out of this. It seems like this year there's been a lot of these little court cases been popping up, a lot of them contract pharmacy related. So to anybody out there, stay tuned. We're probably going to have a little bit more to discuss from a 340B lens. I think we're also looking forward to having some other conversations with some other folks around just buyer training and things like that, of which this would have been a big help. So if you're a new buyer out there, don't be afraid of WAC. It's okay. It does require scrutiny, but it's not out of bounds. All right. Well, Kyle, any last words of wisdom as we adjourn here?
I appreciate you putting this together. Thank you for the discussion. I'm looking forward to hearing how all the hospitals feel about this as we digest it a little bit more. I think we're all coming down off that initial uber excitement that all the bad WAC would just go away. So I think we're coming down off that, and then we'll see where it lands. But I'm kind of with you on that. Less impactful than it initially sounded, right?
Yeah. I was right there with you. I got all the warm and fuzzies when I saw the headline, and then it took about 2 paragraphs in, and I was just like, well, that's a thing. That was pretty much my response after I started reading it. So, all right. Well, we are now educated on that court case. I don't really see much coming out of it, but who knows? There might be some more to talk about. So we might have a second one coming out if anything moves along this particular topic. Kyle, thank you so much for your time and your insights there. Always go to Kyle when you've got a hard question. But this is the place we come when we've got questions. So thanks everybody for joining us on the IGQ. If you've got any comments or anything else, please drop them below. If you've got any ideas for some questions that we haven't addressed, go ahead and type those in there too. And thanks again, everybody. Take care.